All right, let's talk overrated quarterbacks. Always a lively discussion, but unfortunately, I couldn't really come up with that many. Usually, I like to do 7. That's kind of the list number I tend to choose. Feels like a good number for a video. But, I was looking through my rankings, and there just weren't a lot of guys that I thought were, on other lists, were wildly getting put higher on their list than I put on mine. I was pretty in line with some of them, but not all. There were a few that I thought were pretty weird and some questionable things I have, or maybe I'm an idiot. I don't know. Let's get into it. There's a couple of ones that kind of make the list, and then the top few I feel pretty strongly about. But yeah, let's just get into the list. Only 5 players, but let's start off with number 5. Number 5, I am going Will Levis, who, listen. Will Levis showed some flashes last year, and part of this is going to come down to how did you evaluate him coming out of college. I think there were some people, there was some talk about him going like second overall, or maybe even first overall at a certain point last year. I remember that was legitimately something people were saying. There were people who had Levis higher on their board than CJ Stroud. That was not a common thing, not the consensus, but it wasn't the craziest take you'd ever see either. I was not one of those people. I had him as a second round talent. He went in the second round. Actually, I believe I had him as a third round talent. So I was not high on him at all coming out of college. And to my surprise, he came in and actually showed some real flashes. He had some real good moments for Tennessee, and I think that's why he's gotten a bit overhyped. I do see him kind of top 20 on a lot of these lists when I did not have him that high on my list, and I think that's a big part of it is the flashes. Listen, I watched every game he played last year. Yes, the downfield passes to Hopkins were great. Yes, the end of that Dolphins game was great, and he deserves another year. I believe that as well. He had some rough moments last year too. That Tampa Bay game was rough. Wasn't just his fault, but it wasn't not his fault. He couldn't tell when a blitz was coming, even though they were blitzing all the time, right? There are things he has to work on, and he had his real low moments last year as well that you can't just ignore. So again, overrated is always weird, where people conflate overrated with oh, you suck and I don't think you're good. No, overrated usually just means people have, for Will Levis, people have him as a B level prospect. I think he's a B minus level prospect, so he makes the list. It's that simple. Number 4 is Russell Wilson, who I can't figure out what the media thinks about Russell Wilson, what the sports media thinks about Russell Wilson, because, early on last year, everyone was ready to run Wilson out of town, and I was kind of saying, well, wait a second, he's actually playing pretty well this season. It's not great, but he's taking a real step up, and then the Broncos started winning. The defense stopped giving up 70 points. The Broncos started winning. And then everyone said, wow, Russell Wilson has really turned his game around, even though he really didn't. He was still just playing solid Russell Wilson football. And then towards the end of the year, Broncos lost a game or two. They were out of the playoff race. And then the Broncos said, well, let's bench Russell Wilson. He stinks. Let's put in Jarrett Stidham. Let's get rid of him. Let's, cut him right away. And I was kind of well, why now, I guess, because he kind of didn't. I understand it from the Broncos' perspective, but I didn't really think that he was that much worse at any point during the season. It's kind of just consistently a fine quarterback. He'll probably be a fine quarterback for the Steelers. He's on a great contract, so Steelers have to feel good about that. But again, I see him getting put over guys like Derek Carr and Baker Mayfield, which in my opinion, those guys had better years last year. So yeah, because of that, not massively overrated, but overrated enough, I'm going to put him on my list. Number 4 is Deshaun Watson, number 3 is Deshaun Watson, who, listen, obviously it's difficult to talk about a little bit due to the off the field, all that stuff. So that's kind of what gets some of the attention. But for me, with Watson, it's forget about all of that. I keep reading on these lists, people saying well, if he can stay healthy, if the injuries go away, then the Browns will have a star. And I'm kind of have you watched Deshaun Watson play football? Because it hasn't been good. Joe Flacco was, I would say, better than him last year. I think the offense was better once Joe Flacco was there. So Deshaun Watson has had really good seasons with Houston, but we're a bit of ways away from that at this point. We're talking, this is his 3rd season since leaving the Texans. It's possible he'll get back to that. Totally possible. But I'm not banking on anything like that. How could you really? It's just, I don't get why. Again, it's the kind of thing where I'm talking overrated. So I'm looking at what people think about him and then reacting to it. What people have said about Deshaun Watson is that, like, oh, he's a good quarterback who can't stay healthy. Like, that's legitimately what I see. Another guy who gets mocked over, guys like Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield pretty consistently. Well, he hasn't played as well as those guys when he's been healthy with Cleveland. So I don't know what it is. Can he regain, his Houston form? Absolutely. But like, until it happens, I don't get how you can put him, you just kind of say that as an expectation. It makes no sense to me. Number 2, yeah, we can argue. Let's argue, I suppose. Brock Purdy, I do have as number 2 on my overrated list. Listen, I like Brock Purdy. I do. I think he's a very good quarterback. I do think he's more than just a game manager. In fact, some of the best parts of his game is what he can do when plays break down. I think that's kind of his best attribute. Does he have a tendency of putting the ball in harm's way too much? Absolutely. Absolutely he does. Kind of got away with it last year in a way. I'm not sure he'll get away with it in future years, but I think he'll be able to clean that up. He's a young player. There's all that stuff to it. To me, though, why I'm putting him on the list, I mean, this guy was getting a lot of MVP buzz last year to the point where he almost won the award. I think if the Niners if he doesn't have the meltdown against the Ravens, I think he probably does win the award. So again, this is where overrated gets frustrating because I see him on list. I saw him number 2 on one list, which is that's crazy to me. He's not the second best quarterback in football. He's just not. He's not a top 5 quarterback in football. He's a top 13, 15 quarterback in football, around that range, which is really valuable to have, especially when you're on a $1 million deal, right? Like the 49ers are absolutely going to be contenders until he gets paid, like Super Bowl contenders until he gets paid. He's a good quarterback. He can win a Super Bowl, and he nearly did. I mean, the game went to overtime, right? It's not to say that he's a bad quarterback, but I just feel like people are kind of jumping to the Niners are winning because of him, or he is the key guy. I just don't think that's the case. I think he's a good quarterback and a great offense. That when I watch the games, that's how I view him. So yeah, again, it's not to say I think he's bad. I just think that among certain people, they view him as like a top 5 quarterback in football. I'm a little bit colder on him than that, but I still think he's good. And number 1 is Dak Prescott, who is kind of in the same vein. In fact, the consensus, I compiled a bunch of those top lists together, and he was 5th total on the consensus quarterback, which is crazy to me. He was ahead of Justin Herbert, who was 6th. I don't get why we do this every year. Dak Prescott is a solid quarterback. He's similar to Brock Purdy. You can debate which one you like more than the other, but at least with Purdy, well, there's been a little bit of kind of optimism with Purdy. I can kind of understand it because he's a young player and he did have really good numbers and stuff. Like, we've seen Prescott for enough years to know who he is, which is a solid, fine quarterback. So I was baffled at how many people are still talking. I mean, okay, I'll say this: he did have a better, maybe a career year last year, so maybe that's why he's gotten higher on it. I mean, I believe he was 2nd in MVP voting, so I suppose I see the argument and all of that, but I don't know. I just don't get how you can have him that high on the list when we've seen him time and time again do well when he's in a good situation, but when he's in a tough situation, struggle. That's typically what happens with Prescott. So I don't know. That was surprising to me. I think he's the most overrated quarterback in football, but hey, that's just my opinion on it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.